Welcome back to my mental health and crime channel. My name is Huda London. This is the case of the Idaho quadruple murders. May the 4 victims rest in peace. Condolence to their families. I'd like to thank all my subscribers, viewers, for your support, kindness, mindfulness, respect, and everything. I really appreciate you all. I'd like to talk a bit about one of the surviving roommates, Bethany Funk. I believe she's really important in this case. We've heard that Bethany Funk has exculpatory evidence in this case, according to Brian Christopher Kohberger and his lawyer, defense attorney, Ann Taylor. I always wonder how much has Bethany seen that night. She was at the Sigma Chi fraternity party. And Xana and Ethan were there from 9:45 to 1:45 a.m. So Bethany Funk must have seen everything. And if somebody came into the house and did this horrific quadruple murders, the person could have left, or the people, the suspect or suspects could have left from the front door because the front door was open. Was Bethany even at home? Chief Fry refused to call Bethany and Dylan as victims or as witness, sorry. He refused to call them witness. He said they were just there. So that means he must have not believed everything that he heard and the statements that he got from the girls. Why was Bethany and Dylan and the dog Murphy, Kaylee's dog, spared? Why was their life spared? Thank God that the life is spared, but I don't believe that the killer did not know that there were 2 surviving roommates. I don't buy that. I believe this was targeted. These 4 young people were targeted. And I don't believe that one person did it.
A public show, she's now agreed to an interview with the Idaho-based defense counsel. Funk will testify in Reno, Nevada, where she's from, instead of taking the stand in the Lata County, Idaho court, where Kohberger's preliminary hearing is set to begin in late June. Ahead of the hearing, the prosecution expanding its team as they look to bolster their case against Kohberger. 2 deputies from the Idaho Attorney General's office, Jeff Nye and Ingrid Bethany, have been appointed to assist in the prosecution.
Brian, what you doing?
Kohberger was arrested in late December, charged with the stabbing murders of Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Maddie Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves. According to charging documents, their other surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen, saw a male figure with bushy eyebrows, a mask, and black clothing in the home that night. Funk's account of that night is not included in those documents. Prosecutors allege DNA evidence, video surveillance, and cell phone records led them to Kohberger, who is pursuing a PhD at nearby Washington State University. He has yet to enter a plea, but has said through a former attorney he believes he'll be exonerated.
new detail about the Idaho murders could change everything we think we know about the case so far. A neighbor told our Daily Mail reporters that they saw this door right here, the front door to the house, wide open at around 8:30 in the morning on November 13th, that Sunday, hours after 4 people in that house would be murdered and before their bodies would be discovered. The murders are suspected to have taken place between 3 and 4 a.m. That is an approximation, and as of right now, we don't have any other information to indicate how long this door might have been left ajar. And here's how this new detail could potentially change things. You'll remember that in the early days of the investigation, pretty much everyone was suspicious about why the 2 roommates downstairs on the first floor were alive and unharmed. Many people moved on from those suspicions when we learned that allegedly investigators believe the killer entered through this sliding glass door on the second floor or one of the nearby windows also on the second floor. The murders took place on the second floor and the third floor. The 2 surviving roommates lived on the first floor. So the theory there is, if the killer entered on the second floor and then went upstairs and then exited through the second floor, they would have had no need to go to that bottom floor. But if this front door right here on the first floor was used by the killer, either on their way in or on their way out, we are back at square one with questions as to why these 2 first floor roommates were not harmed. Now, I have my own working theory.
Why was this door left open? Was it one or a couple of people who did this? I can imagine if it was a couple of people, they could have gone from the sliding door behind and they could have gone from the front door. The key pad wasn't always activated. That's what Olivia said, Kaylee's sister. And everyone had the password. I believe somebody ran out. One of the surviving roommates ran out from the front door. That's my personal opinion. And Steve Congalvis has said before that they didn't need to go downstairs. But that's only if the targets are upstairs. But I really believe from the beginning that all 4 of them were targets. If it was from the fraternities and the sororities, they must have already decided and pre-planned it. Kaylee came back, according to her mother, to finish up her schoolwork and her university work on Monday, and she was driving back on Tuesday. So it had to be somebody who knew that Kaylee would come back for the last time with her car. But since this was a party house, I wonder if Christopher Koberger is going to say that he's been in there and he's partied there. This case is going to blow up. But I really don't believe that Brian did it alone. If he did it. Bethany knows everything. There's a reason that BK is asking for Bethany. I don't think it's just a game that they're playing. I think she knows something that he knows. And I really believe one of the surviving roommates called Brian to come down there. These unfortunate unlivings happened between 3 to 4. Like Daily Mail said, this was in the beginning of the case. The first 6.5 weeks, 47 days, it was said that it happened between 3 to 4 a.m. That doesn't place Brian Christopher Koberger in the scene at all. I think they changed the timeline to 4 a.m. and after 4 so that it matches with the white Hyundai. The one they were searching was a 2011 to 2013 model, and we know that Jack D has had a Hyundai Elantra, a white one.
Interests and people that the investigators are looking at?
I think it's fair to say that there have been people of interest to the investigators, and everyone that they've identified so far, they've been able to exonerate. Perhaps exonerate isn't the best word, but they've been able to eliminate them as being an actual suspect. And we do not have a name of a person or persons who are actual suspects. That's what they're focusing on still.
So there's not someone behind the scenes that you secretly know about that you're just waiting on one more piece of evidence or one more piece of DNA and then boom, this will be settled?
I can tell you that I'm not aware of any single person with a name that we're focusing on, that the investigators are focusing on.
Okay, so
It could be.
Theory as to why he would want to kill these young people and what, if any, was the connection.
Motive is not an element of crime or murder, but of course, every inquiring mind wants to know why. Why would Brian Koberger do this to 4 innocent victims, college students? Could the state go to trial without motive? Absolutely, but I bet they won't. And the problem here is that we don't even have a connection to these victims. Forget about motive. And how this DNA got there. I'm not at all worried about the DNA.
Don't know everything the prosecution has, but a lot of people think he's the guy, he must be guilty. But there's a long way to go, and a lot of people think that this case isn't a slam dunk.
It's absolutely disgusting. This guy does not have a presumption of innocence. He has the assumption of guilt. I'm Sarah Azari. I'm a criminal trial attorney in Los Angeles. I'm currently a legal analyst for News Nation, and I am the host of the Presumption podcast. You know, pre-trial convictions of high-profile defendants in high-profile cases is nothing new, but Koberger is a whole other level, and I think not only we found him guilty of slaying the 4 Idaho students, but we've decided that he's going to get the death penalty.
The most significant piece of evidence for prosecutors is the DNA of the defendant found on the knife sheath of the alleged murder weapon located underneath victim Madison Mogan's body.
We don't know when and how this DNA got there. So if Brian Koberger is person A and he touches this knife sheath, and then somehow this knife sheath is picked up by somebody else. I mean, he could touch it, he could handle it, it could be anything. And then that person then somehow is in this Kings Road home. That is a perfect explanation of how Koberger's DNA was on that knife sheath. Is insufficient to place him in that home, let alone to place the murder weapon in his hands. That's why I'm not at all worried about the DNA.
This is another huge red flag. Why did the chief allow the grieving families to get the items back? They could be part of evidence too. Everything in that house should have been taken to the forensic place to be tested for other unidentified DNAs, or even for proper DNAs of Brian Christopher Koberger. Nothing was handled well in the beginning of this case. Everything was done unprofessionally. How could they have just given out the furniture and other stuff? We saw small cupboards, pictures, suitcases. All of those things could have serious evidence that could have blown open the case. Where the 3 unidentified male DNAs?
Latent shoe print was found outside the door of DM, one of the surviving roommates from the attack. The shoe print had a diamond-type sole pattern, similar to a Vans shoe. Now, the print matches Kohberger's point of travel that the roommate described to law enforcement during their alleged encounter in the home. When it comes to DNA, the Idaho State Lab located a single source of male DNA on a button snap, attached to a tan leather knife sheath. That sheath was found on Madison Mogen's bed next to her body. Kaylee Gonsalves was found dead next to Mogen in the same bed. The same lab used trash recovered from the Kohberger family residence in Pennsylvania to pin down the suspect. You see, the trash was a probable match for the biological father of the DNA found on the sheath at the scene. But is that enough to get a conviction? Well, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan came on the program Thursday to talk a little more about it.
This would have been an overwhelmingly exerting physical activity he would have been engaged in, just slaughtering these people. Adrenaline is up. There would have been muscle fatigue at this point. He would have been spent essentially by this point in time. So I think that they're considering all of this, a deep dive into the fiber and molecular evidence contained in that Moscow residence is going to be required, and they're going to have to look through every area of that house to see if maybe he had been there before, because they can find, in fact, touch DNA in those locations. I'd be very curious to find out if they're going to be searching through closets, all these places where he could have hidden. And all it takes is to draw just a bit of DNA that's connected back to these victims. How's the defense going to explain that away? How do you explain, you might be able to do it with one person, but if you get a collection of 4 individuals that you've never met or they've never crossed paths, how do you explain that away?
Brian, explain to us better what we're talking about with the DNA that's used to connect Kohberger to the murders, and do you think that is a strong connection moving forward?
I mean, JSM is doing my job right there, because I'll be honest, when I look at these cases, I think, all right, I'm a defense attorney. How do I break this case apart and prove that this person is innocent? I can't in this case, because what they're doing is they're taking that sheath that's a part of the murder weapon and left at the scene next to one of the bodies of the victims, which is great evidence for the prosecution and the police, and they're connecting to the trash in his house. And if they can find similar DNA of a victim on him, like JSM said, I don't know a way to break this apart, because they're connecting so many breadcrumbs that all lead back to Kohberger, and that's just the DNA. We're not talking about the other pieces. So I think this makes it a dangerous case for the defense, but a great case for the prosecution.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's talk about, Terry, about that shoe print evidence, right? Is that going to be even admissible? Do you think it's strong?
I do think it's strong. It may not be as strong as that DNA, but they have a unique shoe print. They said it's diamond shaped. They said it's like a Vans shoe. You better believe they're going to be looking for those shoes. And even if Kohberger threw the shoes away, he could still have purchased those shoes. If there's a store that sells Vans, they're going to be going in and out of those stores looking to see if they can find receipts. And so, if they can tie him to that shoe print and to that shoe, there is another piece of evidence right there that jury can connect to Kohberger. And we've seen it done before. If you remember in the Pike County massacre, we saw George Wagner. He was convicted, and part of the evidence in that case was a shoe print. So they didn't find the shoe there. They may not find the shoe here, but it could be one of those connective dots to convict him.
This might not be the strongest, but maybe even having him on surveillance footage of some kind wearing Vans shoes that match that kind of description may be in and of itself important, but we'll see. Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to definitely want to stay with us as our special coverage of the probable cause affidavit in Idaho college student murders continues. We're breaking down how Moscow police connect Kohberger to that now infamous white Hyundai Elantra, and why the car itself could be so important. Moscow police put out information about a white Hyundai Elantra that they were looking for, something that we reported here on Law and Crime Daily. On November 29th, a Washington State University officer spotted a white Elantra in the parking lot of an apartment complex. Koberger was part of a doctoral program at WSU, and the car came back registered to him. The car was spotted on several cameras near the home, including driving by the house 3 times before the students were killed. 16 minutes later, that same car was seen speeding away from the crime scene. Police also tracked Koberger's cell phone use. The officer who wrote up the affidavit says that Koberger's phone used the same cell phone tower that provided coverage to the victim's house at least 12 times prior to the night of the murder. Between 2:47 a.m. and 4:48 a.m. on November 13th, police allege that Koberger turned off his phone to try to conceal his location. When it comes to proof that Koberger was connected, investigator Joseph Scott Morgan says that the car itself is a critical piece of evidence.
One of the things I'm very interested in as a forensic science guy is that car. That car is a rolling crime scene in and of itself, and it has to be handled with kid gloves at this point. So they're going to take this thing apart piece by piece, and they're going to use every kind of technology that you can imagine on this thing, everything from alternative lighting to luminol or blue star or whatever they're using. They're going to take samples from all inside of this thing, because it doesn't matter how hard you try to clean one of these things, you are not going to escape what we're capable of doing in forensics and recovering molecular evidence.
Is Joseph the best? I really think he's the best. He explains it so well. So Brian, Koberger's phone was supposedly turned on and off during the night of the murders. Explain to us how the affidavit is showing that and why it's so important in this case.
I mean, Jesse, before the show, you said it best. Why didn't he just leave his phone at home? This is probably the biggest part of consciousness of guilt that the prosecution is going to wave as a massive flag, whether it be throughout the case, at trial, and if we get there, at sentencing. This shows consciousness that, hey, I've been here 12 times. Not only does my cell phone, but photos of my vehicle that correspond to the time that my cell phone is pinging off of these towers show me going from point A to point B. Don't forget, his school at WSU and that of Idaho University are only about 10 miles apart, and it's a small town area. They're college towns. And so getting from point A to point B, you usually take typically the same type of roads. And so the ability to track the vehicle and the phone is huge. In law school, we learn that arguments are like bundles of sticks. Each individual argument may be able to be broken, but if you put them together, they're almost unbreakable. This case is a bundle of logs. Any one of these arguments could take down the suspect here, Koberger. And when it comes to tracking not just cell phones, because usually we get one or the other, but tracking cell phones and cell phone and cars, and putting them together and showing the path as he turns off his cell phone going towards the victim's home during the night of the shooting, and then turns it back on as he's leaving at the exact time of the killing, I think that could bury him.
Oh, yeah, I mean, your phone just happens to turn off at the exact point. But Terry, I'll tell you, it's not clear whether the police have the cell phones of other family members. Do you think that that evidence could provide some information?
Well, let's hope they've got everybody's cell phone. The affidavit did mention, obviously, they have Koberger's cell phone, but they had DM's cell phone, and they have at least one of the victims. I think it's safe to assume that they have the cell phones of all of the victims. But I think just as important would be the cell phone of all of the people in that circle close to Koberger. So, for instance, the mother, I mean, was she texting anyone? We know that she was in court at one point. She was very upset. Does she know something? The father, he was in the car when they were driving from one point back to Pennsylvania. So does he know something? Did Koberger text his parents? You know, that could show consciousness of guilt, and it would be admissible in court, particularly if it's an exception to hearsay, like maybe there's an admission there. So I definitely think it's important to look at all of those other cell phones.
And someone could come forward and say, hey, I had an odd conversation with Mr. Koberger at a point in time. Remember, that can come in too. And if he says anything in jail, that can come back to hurt him as well. When we
Look at his Vans shoes. I know many college students wear that. This is a coincidence. Look at his clothes. Clothes don't seem to fit him at all. They look like female clothes. They both are smiling. Maddie's jacket is right behind him. They were even looking at it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Justice for the victims.